Hello, everyone. I am super, super excited for today's conversation. When we're thinking about all things power and what does it look like to disrupt and to interrupt power, I mean, Ebele Okobi was the person that we had to go to, okay? So if you wonder why I'm excited, that is why. Sable Lomax, pronouns she and her, Chief Relationships Officer at Fearless Futures, and this is season 2 of our podcast. I think this is episode 7. I should be keeping up, but obviously I'm guessing in this moment. But we have a guest. I mean, just look at her. Just take, for those who are watching the video replay, just look at her. Ready to go. Look at the vibrancy in the necklace. Look at the picture in the background. So you can understand where my excitement is coming from. How are you today? It is still, we're only 4 hours apart right now because of the time change. So how are you feeling? How's your morning going today?
I'm feeling amazing. I just got back from a trip to Cartagena in Colombia, which, if you know anything about Cartagena, is a center of Black culture. And I am on the eve of a trip to Nigeria, my motherland, my homeland. And so I am feeling amazing. I'm feeling held.
Okay, so I'm going to just let folks know who you are, and then we are going to jump right in. Now, normally, when you get bios, you try to find things to take out just to shorten them because, time is of the essence. But then I was reading yours and I said, there's no way that this could be shortened because each line felt crucial to me considering the perspective and lens you're going to bring to the conversation. So I want the folks to understand just the woman is qualified, y'all. Okay. I just don't know how else to say it. Okay. Bright, brilliant, and qualified. So here we go. Ebele Okobi is a values-led transformational leader who builds mission-driven teams passionate about shifting the arc of the moral universe towards justice. She began her career as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer at Davis Polk & Wardell in New York, London, and Paris, and left corporate law to work in civil society first as a health policy advocate at Consumers Union, and then at Catalyst as an advisory services director, focusing on creating equity strategies for corporations and professional services firms in Silicon Valley and across New York. She left the nonprofit world for Nike's leadership development team and their EMEA headquarters, where she worked in brand strategy across Africa and Nike's women's business. Ebele subsequently spent 14 years in tech policy, government relations, human rights. As Yahoo's legal director and global head of human rights, she built the very first human rights team in tech. At Facebook, Ebele built and led the Africa and then Africa, Middle East, and Turkey policy teams from one person to over 45, during the most politically complex period in the company's history. Ebele's commitment to nurturing and advocating for her team and the community were reflected in her appointments, including as the executive sponsor of Facebook's Black Women at ERG, executive advisor to Facebook's Black Leadership Advisory Council policy pillar. Because, amen, rest is revolutionary, she is thrilled to be on a sabbatical for 2022, chasing joy and making good trouble. You needed this sabbatical.
I did, girl.
I did. How has it been going? Because when I read this, I said she needed this sabbatical.
I did, but you know what? So many of us do. I mean, the more I talk to people, it's been so being a woman, being a Black woman in business is always a blessing, and just the burden that you carry. And then these past 2 years, I think for everyone have been really difficult. So I feel really privileged and grateful to have the opportunity to just rest and take time off and focus on chasing joy.
I know you just came off a trip. You're on the eve to the motherland. And I know sometimes in context, when people say the motherland, they're talking about the entirety of the African continent. But I appreciate the specificity in saying I'm going to Nigeria. That's my portion of the motherland. That's
Those are my people.
Right? Those are my people. Yeah, I'm not talking about the whole continent. Nothing wrong with the whole continent. I'm talking about my people within the continent. What else, just curious before we jump in, what else do you have planned for this year's sabbatical? Or are you just kind of letting the spirit guide you for how the year rolls out?
It's interesting. So I'm trying to invite serendipity into my life, but I, like many of us, am kind of
I know.
control, And so one of the things that I've been really interested in, that I've had the opportunity to plunge into, is this intersection between art, culture, and liberation. I'm very excited about the Venice Biennale, which is like the World Olympics for art.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it because this year the UK has selected a Black woman artist to represent it. Scotland has selected a Black woman artist. So it's Sonia Boyce in the UK, it's Alberta Whittle in Scotland, and the US has Simone Lee, who is incredible, dynamic. There's just a New Yorker article that came out about her. So, and then France has an Algerian
I
woman,
saw
and
that. Yeah.
Switzerland has a woman from Morocco, and Canada has a Black man. And so it just feels very much like Black Year at Venice. And so I'm a patron of the US and I'm sorry, of the UK and the Scotland pavilions, and I'm hosting a party, a Black party, in Venice, along with Ashley Adjei, who is a homegirl from the Bay Area and also married to David Adjei, who, if you've been to the National Museum for African American History, he is the
Yes.
architect behind that and many other beautiful spaces. And
I
so
love
we
that
are bringing
museum.
Black people together to just celebrate. And so I'm doing a ton of stuff at the intersection of art and culture throughout the year that I'm really excited about.
Oh, the jealousy. I might have to pray on this. Okay. We've asked this question of every guest. So, going to start here with you. A past moment, and I'm sure you have many. It can go as far back as childhood. Far back sounds a bit dramatic. As early as childhood. What was, or what, in your opinion, has been a crucial mic drop learning moment in terms of all things equity? So an equity-based mic drop learning moment that really it resonates with you, and it comes back to you in different moments throughout time.
So I've had many. So I don't know that this is the most significant, but I'm just saying because it's the most recent. So I just came back from Cartagena, which I said, so Cartagena there's a town outside of Cartagena called Palenque. Palenque is the very first, oldest African free settlement in Latin America, actually in North America. And it was founded by an enslaved person who escaped and fought off the Spanish to a draw and created this town of free people. There was this treat. They were such fierce fighters that the Spaniards were forced to do a treaty to just say, okay, you guys can keep your patch of freedom. Of course, colonizers being colonizers, they broke the treaty and they ended up killing him. But the town remained a free town. And for me, it was pivotal because for a couple things. One, understanding the extent to which the white supremacy is such a global concept. So flying into Colombia, and there's what you think Colombia is like. And I've been to Cali before for business, but Cartagena and Palenque, these are Black places. I mean, these are like you're walking around and it felt like you're in Oakland. And so a couple things. So one, recognizing the extent to which white supremacy has shaped so many parts of the world, and also there's a conversation about how you address white supremacy, which is very much about how you accommodate yourself to it. And so I've been very interested in stories about people who actually use struggle and were successful in struggle. So that for me, so seeing that was huge. And then the final thing is an artist I follow named Caliban, who does incredible work. And he posted something that said, he was talking about Thomas Sankara and a bunch of these heroes from Black liberation movements. And he said, most of my heroes are failures. And that for me, I read that a month ago, and it was because that is true of me. So if I think of all the people that I revere, there are people who either died in struggle or led people to the mountaintop, but they didn't get there themselves. And so they themselves didn't get there. And so there's something in there for me that is about how do you remain in struggle knowing that you may not ever see the fruits of your labor? How do you remain motivated? How do you find joy? And so the final thing I'll say is, because the recognition of that, yes, white supremacy can feel overpowering. Yes, it can feel like you won't make it to the mountaintop. And so that for me is a call to joy, in the sense that how can I hold space for struggle? How can I hold space for being relentless and impatient about progress and still create joy? So I think those holistically are some of the things that, have been mic drop moments for me.
I have all these questions planned, but I don't even know what's going to happen in terms of questions, because even you just now and me hearing you saying, how can I remain impatient? I just feel like that if this were a paper, this would need to be bold, underlined, underscored a few times, because how many times have folks asked, black people, indigenous people, whoever the marginalized group community in question, to be patient? And it's just
Yeah.
something there. It's like, the wanting to remain impatient while trying to, get to liberation, however someone might define that.
Yeah, I mean, who does patience serve?
Listen.
So yeah, when we say, oh, it's fine, and when we allow other people to set this timeline of our own liberation, who does that serve? And I think that is a whole spectrum of struggle, right? And I think people come in different places, and there are people for whom their gift is patience. There are people, and I think that that's amazing. I don't know if you went to. I have abandoned religion in my old age, but when I was little, of course, I went to Sunday school, and there's a
I
song,
went to
all
Sunday
God's
school.
creatures gotta yeah, all God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. And so my key is impatience. And so I'm that person who's saying we can do better. We have to do better. We have to do better. I'll let other people,
Mm-hmm.
coddle and make people feel comfortable, but I don't think that's not
My
my
ministry.
ministry. It's not my
That's not
ministry.
my ministry. I mean, if you can tell why I'm excited for the conversation, hopefully you have proof now. It's only been a few minutes and you've already given us so much. May 2020, Black Lives Matter uprising due to the deaths of George Floyd, which I think is also interesting to highlight. Breonna Taylor was murdered in March, but the massive uprising came due to George Floyd's death, and the way in which the world responded on a truly global scale. And then not just, the citizens of the respective countries, the way companies responded on a global scale, many of them being, and I'm just going to use words that were shared, in shock of that such a tragedy could occur. And for many of us who are impatient or maybe patient, depending on where you lie on the patience spectrum ministry line, we're interested in us being polite with the use of the word shock, considering how racism has permeated and infiltrated every fabric of society in the US, in the UK, and beyond, because it's a global system. For you, when you were watching, as things were unfolding, what was your perspective on how companies were responding?
It's so interesting because I felt so conflicted in that moment. And so number one, of course, my heart went out to George Floyd's family, and there was this just sense of exhaustion. But I had an overwhelming, those who know me will not be surprised, but I had an overwhelming emotion of just rage.
Yeah.
You're shocked?
Yeah.
How are you shocked? Like, how are you shocked? I mean, so for me personally, also, so those of you who know me, my brother was murdered by police in 2018. He was murdered for walking down the sidewalk wearing a backpack, and there was no world upright, like the world didn't stop because my brother was murdered. And my friend, who was also a coworker, a colleague of mine at Facebook, Sharon Cooper, her sister Sandra Bland was murdered. And so
Her sister
there,
Sandra. Okay.
yeah, and so there are
How many?
there are thousands of us. I mean, one of the jokes I made after the time is there actually needs to be like an app, so your relative has been murdered by police, because it's so
Yeah.
common. And so for me, the fact that that companies were discovering racism for the first time, and worse, were not locating themselves within
Yeah.
it, right? So then you started having companies being shocked about police brutality. Never mind that we've been telling you guys this for centuries. But then they weren't locating themselves within the problem. They're saying, okay, we think it's sad that somewhere far away police are doing this. They weren't looking at their executive leadership teams and saying, wait a minute, y'all are running a plantation. If y'all have at senior levels only white
Yeah.
people, only, and then you have people of color, indigenous people at the
Yeah.
bottom, but you're shocked? Like, I just so short of a long as I found it completely disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that a lot of the promises that companies made in the aftermath of it were things that they just made to kind of get them, they were performative because they're also talking about areas in which they didn't have power. When companies have power, they have power to make a difference when it comes to systemic racism, and they are consistently choosing not to use it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, for those who made pledges or put out, their diversity statement, their commitment to XYZ. I know on different websites, because you can put like a banner at the top, it's like, we are committed to like Black Lives Matter. It was different little signals of what I would argue to be performative allyship that happened. Have you seen it in your just observations and reading things and having conversations with folks? Have you seen, and you don't have to name them if you have, but have you seen a company that has like did all those, but it's now 2022, we're almost 2 years after, and it has actually been doing the work to show what it looks like to be committed to dismantling and disrupting racism?
So I think it's a difficult question to ask me because it's not as if I've seen across companies,
Yeah.
right? So I don't have that perspective. I can say that the companies I have been intimately connected through, either through friends or whatever, that has not been the case. So it has not been the case that companies made commitments and have followed through. And I think part of it, so I was on, I had a panel conversation, and John Amechi, I know people call him Amechi, but his last name is Amechi. He's Igbo. Who was
It is.
he's actually born he's born in the UK, but went to the US and played basketball. And was the first NBA athlete to come out as gay, and he's incredible. And so now he talks about diversity, and he said something yesterday or the day before that stuck with me, and it is weaponized ignorance.
Woo!
Or weaponized incompetence.
Yes.
And I was like, that is so there is this thing like, well, gosh, yes, of course we recognize that this is an issue, but these types of things take time. And oh my gosh, can you help us?
Yeah.
Tell us, how do we fix it?
Look at what
That's
progress
nonsense.
we've made so far.
Yeah, look, you guys, we used to be at 1%, and now we're at 1.2. Like, that's amazing, guys. We have almost doubled. And then coming to you as a person of color and saying, hey, we really care about this. Like, what can you do to help us? Y'all know, I mean, it's not difficult. You guys aren't hiring and you're not promoting. And that's just a basic. That's not even talking about the company decisions that are made that have an impact on communities. That's a long-winded way of saying I actually don't know any companies that, in my view, have been relentless about addressing this as an issue. But it's not like I'm looking at multiple companies. But I think general thing, if you talk to people who work at these companies, is that there's sort of a sense of like, this is a hard problem, like it'll take hundreds of years to solve it. So, if you guys could just be patient in the interim,
Here goes that word again, patient. So, Nigerian American woman, you've worked in London. Obviously, you've traveled about, whether it's for work or for personal reasons. So I imagine that you have this just inherently, based on your upbringing, where you were born, where your people are from, where you've lived for years, that you have this global perspective on like what's required to do justice work. As you've traveled and you have the different lenses, the different lenses and the perspectives and such, what do you do to ground yourself in like the solidarity of the struggle? And just to give you some context, I found, and I'll just use racism because that's where, what the system we've been talking about this far, sometimes might be putting it lightly, there can be this like visceral disconnect for, we need to focus on racism in the US. We can't go across the pond, even if it's in a virtual manner, and support those who are struggling with racism in the UK. Or it's like, we can't focus on the US and the UK. We need to go to Brazil, y'all. We can't focus in Brazil. We need to go here. And not realizing that we are struggling within the diaspora. And the roots of the mechanics of the system are the same. The way it manifests might show up differently, but we could actually stand in solidarity with each other, and how powerful that could be. Like, what have you done to ground yourself in recognizing, wait a minute, y'all, US, UK, whatever the country might be, Dominican Republic, Cuba, etc., can we put our fist up and stand strong together? Like, what have you done to ground yourself in being rooted to? I'm trying to dismantle the system. I'm not trying to dismantle the system for this one city or this one country.
Yeah. I think one of the things is recognizing that all of the struggles are the same. They're all connected. And I think, and that who does it serve to separate the struggles? Like, who does it serve?
Mhm.
It doesn't serve us. And so understanding that, and then I think often we focus on, racism or homophobia or misogyny without focusing on the root cause. And I think if you focus on the root cause, if you focus on dismantling the root cause, which is white
We
supremacy,
can
white
connect.
patriarchal supremacy, rampant capitalism, if you focus on
Yeah.
that, then you realize that all the struggles are connected. And it was really a gift. So when I was at Facebook, I started as a director for Africa, and then I was promoted to Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. And the joy of being able to help people see the extent to which they're connected. The struggle in Palestine is intimately connected to Black liberation struggles. And in fact, I was privileged to have on my team a woman whose father had written sort of a seminal book on the connections between Black liberation struggles in the 60s and 70s and the Palestinian liberation struggle. And I actually brought him to my team to talk about his book. And I think the more people are educated about what the system of power is, the more you cannot help but understand that they're
Connected.
all
Yeah.
linked. And they're all connected. And the other thing is, I think, centering ourselves on the intersections that are most vulnerable. So if you solve for a trans person who's disabled, who's Black, if you solve for that, then so trickle down doesn't work. Trickle down doesn't work, but trickle up does. Do you know what I mean? So if you're solving for people who are the most severely impacted by systems of power, then you're solving for everyone, including white people, except for white people who are mediocre and in their jobs because they're mediocre. Those people should be concerned. Anyone who is upheld by systems of power, yeah, you're going to be concerned because equity actually does impact you if you're in a position, if you are in your position because of a lack of equity. But yeah, I think the biggest thing was recognizing what the foe is, and then recognizing if you keep your eye on what the foe is, then it's clear that we're all working together and that we are all connected.
I'm gonna have to find a way to clone you. I don't believe in cloning human beings, but I do because
There's so many of us,
I know,
girl. There's so many.
I know, but I feel like we should just do a little overpopulation. Let me focus. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Hiring us more, promoting us more. And oftentimes when that's conversations taking place, we're talking about recruitment, the 1%, and now we're at 1.2. Let's everyone celebrate. Let's bring in a famous Black speaker to talk to everyone about, whatever the topic may be. We've done fantastic, y'all. And then, that be that. We might not even grow from 1.2%. And there's so much focus on the pipeline problem. I mean, if I got 10 cents since I've been at Fearless Futures in particular about the pipeline problem, I'm not saying my student loans would be gone, but I'm saying we'd be almost at, completion in terms of paying them off. But we know that that's nonsense. Like, we know it's not true. And it's often used as an excuse to justify taking measurable action that you have to be accountable for. And you've built teams. You went from 1 to 45. So we know it's possible. You've done it. You know it's possible. Can you tell the people how you've done this magical thing? Because they do seem to believe it's
Yes.
magic. And I want them to know
Yes.
it's not magic. All humans have the possibility to do this.
So I think I would go back to John Amaechi's weaponized incompetence. So it is deciding. I actually prefer to keep my workplace and to keep power looking the way it is. And so I will then say, oh, it's just so hard to find. And so I remind people of the inherent racism within that. So think about what you're saying. What you are saying is that Black people, Latino people, across all of these enormous communities, you cannot find someone. It's nonsense. You can't find one person. One of my favorite stories about this is I have a friend named Darren Isom who is now, I can't remember where he is, at Bridgespan. But at one point, he was a funder on arts programs. And one of the things he would do, because he was a funder, is whenever he would meet with the program, he would meet with the board and say, I don't see your community, the communities you're serving are people of color. Why is your board? Why don't you have anyone on your board who's a person of color? And they would say, oh, it's just so difficult pipeline. And he told me this, and this story stayed with me. He said one time someone said that, and he said, I've seen all your resumes. because he's a funder. So I'm a funder. I've seen your resumes. I know what schools you've been to. This is a mediocre bunch. So that you would
Whew.
say you can't find someone to rise to your level of mediocrity. And I thought that was amazing because what we usually do is then we throw people who have two, like look at Kataji, sis Kataji. She has
I
I
mean,
mean, is there a
she
box she
doesn't check.
doesn't tick? So we throw people with all of these to sit on a bench with Amy Coney Barrett and beer drinking Kavanaugh. Like so I love that statement because it helped ground people. Wait a minute. Y- y'all are this is not a Mensa bunch. This is not like this isn't King Arthur's circle. This is y'all are average. And you're telling me you can't find an average black person. So anyway, in my case, what I did was I was relentless. So imagine someone telling me I'm hiring for Africa across the entire country of Africa, and they're like, oh, it's impossible to find an African person who can do policy. Nonsense. The fact that you've said that, think about when you said that aloud and you heard yourself, what did it sound like? And so I was relentless. So I recruited my own
Okay.
people. I sat down with some of the recruiting people and said, this is how you recruit across the country. Because a lot of things is their own
Yeah.
ignorance. And because they're ignorant, they don't know which schools to go to. They don't know what competencies. They're creating job specs that essentially are like, I want a white man. And then they're just arranging around and they're having criteria. So for example, imagine recruiting for Africa and saying, well, but I want the person to have 10 years, 15 years of experience working in the US as a
Yeah, that's not
lobbyist.
like,
Why?
that's coded for
Why?
white.
Why? Yeah, that's coded for why. And why would that person, the skill set that you have for lobbying the US Senate is totally different if you want someone who's lobbying in Nigeria or Ghana or Senegal. And where would you do that? Imagine hiring for a US role and saying, oh, but you know what? I only want someone who has experience in Nigeria because it doesn't make any sense. Only
Mhm.
racism would make you flip that because there's a sense that once you've mastered Europe or the US, everything else is just sort of a lesser version of it. When it's not, they're completely different. So I think helping people be really granular about what you actually need, helping people understand that no, it's possible. Once you understand it's possible, helping people recruit in a different way. And the other thing is hire senior people. I can't tell you how many people they start hiring and they're like, let's have an internship program. What the
There's
hell?
always an
By the time
internship
that
program.
Yes, always internship. So by the time you hire that junior person who you then chase out because you created an environment that's completely toxic, you need to hire senior people because senior people are force multipliers. Like my team alone, my entire team is African, Arab, queer, Muslim. Every single person fit into one of those categories. But that's because I'm a black woman and I was relentless and I was senior enough at a certain point and, dedicated enough to make it happen. You have to hire more of us at that level and examine, ask yourself why you feel more comfortable only hiring junior people. Nothing wrong with junior people, but why is it why do you feel more comfortable with people that you don't think are threatening to you? So yeah, I think hiring senior people and letting them and creating an environment where they can thrive, it will come because we put our backs into
Hmm.
it.
It was something. I mean, you said so much, but something in there in particular. It's like you were at that level, so you had the power to be able to do things differently. And going back to how folks will flip racism when it's beneficial to them as to why they can't find people. And you'll hear from folks who have the power and the influence within the organization still make excuses as to why they can't find someone. And you've used the word over and over again, so I'm sure I'm going to be singing it by Saturday. Being relentless, it's like this issue is not about you not having the power to make certain choices. It's you not being dedicated to doing
Yeah.
anything differently. And let's just focus on what
Yeah.
let's probably locate that problem. This isn't about pipeline.
Yeah.
This is about your unwillingness to do something different
Yeah.
and to be committed to it, because you can't try it for 1 week and go, we couldn't find someone. You can't talk
Yep.
to one different
Exactly.
school and then go, oh well, they're not there. It's like, we're here.
Yep.
We've been here.
I I think the other thing is we need to start talking about it in terms of this is separate from the term of incompetence. So if you're a recruiter and your job is to recruit for Africa or the Middle East and you cannot recruit Africans or people from the Middle East, you're actually bad at your job. And so I think, instead of it being seen as sort of an extra side thing, like, oh God, if You have to do the diversity recruiting. That means no, that's a core part of your job. And if you can't do that, then you're not competent for your job. And I would say the same with managers. There is so much conversation within companies about how do we give women, queer people, Black people the tools to survive this toxic environment that we've created. Why is that? Like, why
Why
are
is
you
that the
fixing
focus?
us? The focus should be on the people who have never managed people other than people who look just like themselves. And so they're floundering. And so because of them, you're losing people. That should be the focus because these are incompetent people. And so this sense that managing diverse teams is like a side thing. No, that's your actual job. And if you can't do it, you're actually incompetent. So I always laugh bitterly when people talk about
Oh,
lowering the bar because I look at the bar, I was like, the bar's in hell. Like you have a senior person who's a terrible manager, who cannot recruit, who can only manage people who look exactly like him. Is that not a liability? And then you're comparing that person with someone who can build diverse teams, someone who can do their job and mentor other people. Have we not lowered the bar for
yeah.
Chad?
Where's the bar
Like what is
actually
Chad's bar?
low?
So I think, where is the bar? Yeah, so I think thinking about it in terms of competence, as opposed to it being like, oh, how can we help Black people and women survive this terrible culture we've created? No, no, no. How can we give managers accountability so that they're not creating these terrible cultures, which quite frankly are bad for everyone? They're not
Mhm.
just bad for people with minoritized
And
identities.
it, as you say that, I'm thinking through how many folks aren't making the connection between talent retention. Like I've heard folks, and not necessarily in my work with Fearless, but just in other conversations, like, but we recruit Black people, we've recruited Indigenous people, we've recruited queer Black people. We actually had 2 whole disabled folks on the team, and they never stay. And it's like, and you haven't made the connection as to why folks get the hell out of there within 1 to 2 years. And you think the problem is us, so whatever community might be in question, like, stop putting women on programs to be bolder and talk louder. Maybe we need to
Right.
re-envision how we define success, and what we the criteria for what leadership looks like, and how many times we're getting spoken over in the meetings. This not making the connection between recruitment and retention is always fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's an MLK quote when he talks about some of his qualms about integration. And he says, I fear that I'm integrating my people into a burning house, because he's talking about the US. You're integrating into this place that fundamentally at its core is rotten. If your company fundamentally at its core is rotten, stop inviting people into your rotten environment. You got to fix it. And I think one of the things that companies struggle with, which seems obvious, is if the people with minoritized identities at your company are desperate to leave, what do you think we don't talk? I mean, y'all already think we know all the Black people. So with that knowledge of
That
like, I
exists.
know every Black person, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think we are saying in the drum
Like,
circles of the like
a
unit?
mass
Like, what do you think?
chat, and it goes
What
to
do you
every
think?
Black person.
Right. Right. There is like one newsletter that we all share. So, what do you think people are saying about your company? So, if your company is a trashy place to be, bringing new people in won't solve it. You got to fix what you have. You have to solve your burning house problem.
And then recognize the commitment required. You can't have like one initiative for Indigenous folks or Muslim women, and it lasts like 2 months. First of all, why is it initiative? But we won't go down that lane. And then it's done for 2 months, and they're like, look, but the Muslim woman still left. It's like,
Right. Right. But this is where I think you have to turn the camera around. The problem is not the Muslim woman who just came and just trying to do her job. It was never her problem. She came, she was super excited, she's overqualified. She probably came in under leveled and
I'm gonna
underpaid,
do
but she
it.
was like, I'm gonna make this work. Yes, and then y'all, fuckery. So the camera needs to be turned around, and we need to think about, do the managers we have, is the architecture we have within the company an architecture that's inherently toxic? And if it is, you have to fix it. You have to
You
fix
have
it.
to fix it. and you have to resource it properly. But that's the conversation, I think, for another day. It's like you can't just hire the one person and go, all right, change things for the 7,000.
Sparkle. You can't hire like the one black person. So this is the one black person who's on your senior leadership team and be like, fix it.
That's not
Like
how this
that it does,
works.
no, that's not how any of this works while you're still
Mm-hmm.
clutching onto power. So you refuse to integrate your leadership team, but then you task this one sorry person with the responsibility for integrating the rest of the company when you've shown the company that you don't think it's important because everyone who reports to you and everyone who reports to them is white. So, like you've done that. You have done that.
We tried.
See, we
We brought them
tried.
in like
Like,
she was gay, Muslim, disabled, and
right.
you
She was
could.
trans. I have seen her use a wheelchair. She fits
Yeah.
all the boxes and she alone couldn't fix it. It's not a possible thing. And y'all aren't serious. There, if you think about if you look at companies, all the things that companies value and how they resource those things versus how they resource this, it's clear. It's not something you're serious
Speaking
about.
about power and people and all things that come with that, I feel like in the last, maybe since 2016, I'm not going to say last 2 years, that would be just not accurate. I would say since 2016, there's been so much focus on free speech and what folks should be able to say, and we cannot, censor what folks say. It's a right to be able to say what you want to say, what comes to mind, not realizing that many of these statements have material consequences for folks, particularly marginalized folks, whatever their identity or identities might be. And I feel like we see this a lot in the US and UK. But I can say this, it's the amendment, it's the law, et cetera, and how this shows up in a workplace context when folks from, it could be like the LGBTQIA plus community, they're saying XYZ said this, and person says no, but it's my freedom. And it's like, yeah, but what you said encourages violence, or it dehumanizes, something along those things. How have you seen that play out when companies are saying they're committed to equity and inclusion and diversity and belonging and all of the jargon words that exist, but then going, no, but I can't tell someone they can't say XYZ? Like, why do folks fall for free speech so easily?
So I will start by saying this is something that has chapped my hide for decades. And this, I'll tell you why. So one, I'm a recovering lawyer. So like I was a lawyer. I'm not now. You shouldn't hire me to do any lawyer stuff. But the First Amendment protects speech against governments. So it gives you as a citizen of the
It's
US,
not,
because the First
yeah,
Amendment
it's
is
not a
not a
global
global
amendment.
amendment, people. It's only in the US, so please. But that protects you from
Yeah,
government sanction. So what it's saying is that you as a citizen should have the right to challenge your government. So Black Lives Matter, all of that stuff, you should have a right to challenge your government. It has nothing to do with whether or not you want to tell your Black coworker, I think you're here for affirmative action.
that's not free speech.
That's not, First Amendment doesn't have anything to do with that. Your Black coworker does not represent the government. Your Black coworker has no power over you. So you saying that to them is not a brave exercise of voice against the powerful. That's you being an asshole. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing in that moment. And so accept that. So don't pretend like you think it's something different. So anyway, so my first issue is that when people talk about the First Amendment, they don't know what they're talking about. And the First Amendment has nothing to do with that conversation. Second of all, nothing protects you from the consequences of your actions. So if you say a thing and that shows you to be a bad manager, then you're a bad manager. Like it doesn't. If you manage, for example, people with minoritized identities, and you make it clear that you think those people are subhuman or are less valuable than other lives, it is a completely valid inquiry to say, wait, are you qualified to manage these people given what your views are? There is no protection against the consequences of your words. And so it has been since time immemorial the ability to shun people for for statements that go against norms. We have always done that. And the other thing that irritates me a lot is if you have a minoritized identity, you spend a lot of time thinking very carefully about what you say. You spend a lot of time managing around fragility because your job is on the line, your livelihood is on the line. And so to have someone who would, I mean, it is in my older age that I've become completely immune to white fragility. Like I just have no interest in it. I'm not going to pad around your feelings around it. If something's true, I'm going to say it. But the vast majority of us don't behave like that. And so to have someone say, "Oh gosh, I'm in a position where I have to be careful what I say." Welcome to
Welcome.
my life, ma'am. Like welcome. And the consequences for people with minoritized
So
identities are
severe.
severe, up to and including like
Yeah.
horrible consequences. And so this notion that now someone will tell you, "Oh gosh, you shouldn't have said that racist thing or that homophobic thing," and that's considered something that ruins someone's life. I always think y'all couldn't live my life
Mm-hmm.
for half an hour.
What as you were talking, my brain started connecting, and I've done it before, but just in this moment, like free speech to all of the focus around cancel culture, where you have folks who have privilege in powerful positions going, I just can't say what I used to say. And it's like, how many of us have never been able to say what we have wanted to say for how long? Welcome to cancel culture. Also, who is historically canceled? And who gets to be forgiven with a pat on their
Exactly.
back over and over again?
Right. And let's think about the differences between what we want to say. So those of us with minoritized identities want to talk about our experiences. We're
We're looking
looking
for
for equity.
equity.
So but you are complaining because you can know, and it's funny because you actually, most of them can, because the consequences
Yeah.
are de minimis. But you're complaining because you cannot freely
That you can't
denigrate whole groups
dehumanize.
of people. Can we
Yeah.
just compare? Can we just compare what our aspirations are? Like your aspiration is to be free to
And degrade.
dehumanize whole swaths of people. Our aspiration, yes, our
Yeah.
aspiration is to live. Like we just want to live.
We
Like
truly.
so no, I have no patience, and also put that in the category of weaponized incompetence because like if you're talking to someone, unless you truly are mentally challenged, that it's not cool to use your platform and to use your power to degrade whole groups of people. That's not right. And to be asking for the opportunity to do that and to have the nerve to be upset because sometimes there might be consequences, examine yourself,
Go
sir.
have a look in the mirror. Think about what think about what you've
Look in
done.
the mirror. Think about your life and what brought you here. Why are you trashed?
Oh man, and I think about like everything you've said this far, and it's clearly that there is courage running all through your veins. Like if there was a blood type, first of all, I'm no medicine. I'm not putting any IV in anyone. Let's just throw it out there. Unless there's a mass disaster, if for some reason I feel like this is what I have to do to save a life, no needle will be coming from Sable. But there's clearly courage, like blood type courage is running through your veins. I want to call you Professor Okobi in this moment. Um,
No, no, ma'am. There are people
I
who earn
know, but
professor.
no disrespect
I
to
do
anyone
not.
who has a PhD or is currently going through that process. I've read enough dissertations in my lifetime. No, thank you. Please don't ask me to edit again. What would
No,
you say
thank
to
you.
a leader who is listening to you? So this has been a replay. They're listening or watching, because it is a beautiful sight to see. Just want to say that. And they're like, I hear you. And I've stood up, but then I got shut down. And, they've been rejected in their desire to like stand up in courage and say, no, I'm going to be relentless. What do you say to them? Like, what does it mean to sustain courage and relentlessness throughout, like to make it sustainable versus going, well, I tried 3 times and leadership shut me down, so now I'm going to give up for the entirety of the rest of my career even though I have 15 years left. What do you say to someone who needs to build sustainable courage in the spirit of being relentless in this work?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the person, right? So if you're someone who's at the intersection of minoritized identities,
Oh
it's a
yes,
completely
not for
different
that.
message because
Yeah, I'm not
exhaustion is
talking about them.
real. Like, yeah,
I'm
so
talking
so
about
that's if you are someone if you're someone who sits with a full bucket of privilege related to whiteness and are in your role, I mean, one of the conversations that I'm sure I got in trouble for was I remember sitting with a bunch of white South Africans and saying, "Gosh, it's so interesting because you cover Africa and you're all white. Like, there's no black people here. I find that interesting." And then and them saying, "Well, we couldn't find anyone." And I was like, "How can you not find anyone in a whole black ass country?" But I said the other thing to recognize is you guys aren't here because you're the most qualified. Because if you exist in a space that has systemically put other people down, you're not the most qualified. You stand on the backs of
Yeah,
multiple people. So I think the extent to which people recognize that they are beneficiaries of a system that has crushed people with minoritized identities, so you owe. And the moment you start to get sad or tired or whatever, look around at your colleagues who are doing this work, plus our jobs, plus having to be more excellent than you are to get half of what you get, and buck up. Like, I mean, if you need
do
to
what
read
you
a
gotta do.
story about read a story about people of color who have persevered and who have persisted, who have been killed for persevering, your life is not on the line. It's not on the line. So I think helping people see where they sit. So you sit in a system where you
Mm,
have the position that you have because you stand on the backs and shoulders and the
mm,
necks of people who have been
mhm.
pushed out
And
of those systems.
violently,
I think if you recognize the
not a
extent to
gentle
which
push.
violently, the extent to which no, the extent to which you exist because of violence that has been done in your name, and think about whether or not it really is hard to send another email to say, "Hey, have we looked at the pool?" Like, is that hard? Like, think about the blood. I mean, I keep saying I went to Cartagena. Cartagena was founded by Spaniards who, when they got there, they dug up the graves of indigenous people, looted the graves, took the stuff, sold it, and they sold it so that they could enter into the lucrative
I mean,
human trafficking business. And then they made Cartagena a center for this trafficking of Africans. That made them super rich, and it made them so rich that they became a target of pirates. So they then decided to build a wall, and the wall was built by enslaved people, thousands of whom died. Stories like that litter the history of civilization. So all these countries are built on the blood, and all these companies are built on the blood and bones and backs of millions of people. You can have that one
mhm,
on one. You will survive it. You will survive, and
mhm.
know that not doing it means that because doing
And being
nothing is
complicit is
upholding
a
the system that you're in.
yeah.
Yeah, being complicit in it. Right. Yeah, so just, so that's what I would say. And the fear that is when I'm so struck by the fear is like, "Oh, people will think that I'm pushy." And
Not
did you
did you
die?
die.
Yeah, like for the right. No, I'm saying, like, did you die? Like, you'll be fine. And so anyway, I actually have very little patience for that, and the extent to which, especially given what has gone before, and be really realistic about what it costs you. It costs you an uncomfortable moment, And finally, the data shows that people who advocate for diversity issues who are not in the groups actually get a bump. So white men who advocate for women, white men who advocate, they are praised for doing the bare minimum. Now, for people who are at the intersection of various minoritized identities, that's a cost to us. So it's actually bad for us. And so think about the extent to which you can take the burden off someone who
Mhm.
is standing in the gap, and who is being penalized when you actually only
Mm.
get
Beautiful
flowers
flowers,
for it.
freshly cut in season. Okay, just
Freshly
bring out the
cut,
sexiest
exactly.
vase you own. Those of us who are like, "Flowers, I'm just trying to
Exactly.
get paid fully here. I'm just trying to
Exactly.
live."
I'm just trying to live.
Ah, joy. It is indeed revolutionary as a Black woman, a Black Nigerian woman. You needed a break. I read the bio. I said, "Ooh, I mean, I want her to take 2023 if it's possible too." Shout out in August. How are we feeling for this last quarter, upcoming quarter? But For those
Exactly.
who are listening who are from, a, a community that has been marginalized, or communities, and find themselves at multiple intersections, like, what would you say to them in terms of, what does it look like to practice joy, and even encouraging them to find the courage to seek joy, even if it might look very different than yours? It might not be a year
Yeah.
sabbatical, but just, what does it look like to really go, I understand what I'm navigating and that I'm trying to live, but I can also have joy too while doing so.
So many of us work so hard, and so many of us give so much of ourselves, and everyone who's in positions that, or most of the people I know who are in positions of power, not only do our regular jobs, we spend so much time with community. So whether they're community at our organizations, mentoring and supporting, they're also larger communities. We volunteer, like we do them. If you look at any, any executive who's has minoritized identity, we're doing all this other stuff, and there it can feel like I don't have time. Like, how can I have time for joy? And the thing is, if you go back, there's
Oh,
Austin
I
Channing
love
Brown,
her.
this amazing
I'm
Black woman
still
who
here.
wrote this book, I'm Still Here. That book is amazing, and that last chapter I reread so many times because it brings me to tears. And
Mm.
she talks about the death of hope, and the death of hope sounds like a horrible, sad thing. But in order for you to go on, recognizing that whatever it is you're working towards, you're not going to see. And so, given that, you owe it to yourself. You joy. Darren, oh my God, at the Ford Foundation, this head of the Ford Foundation, who's an incredible human being. I have followed his career also for decades. And he says, I owe it to my ancestors to have joy. They didn't survive and struggle and suffer in the ways that they did for me not to have joy. And so that's what I would tell
It
us. I
will
would say there
always
is
be worth
always
it.
work.
Yeah.
The work is constant. The work is constant, but your ability, or your to take time out, and again, it doesn't have to be a grand thing, to prioritize joy, to be relentless about joy, and to support each other. The most joy that I have had is in squad, like is in community, is in creating community, and in sharing. Like, I went to Cartagena with a dear friend of mine named Lovey. I saw my daughter there. I saw someone who'd been on my team there. And so, this ability to make connections with each other, for me, has been one of my deepest joys, to reach out, to ask people how they're doing. Yeah, to spend time really in community. That has been some of the deepest joys. And to know that joy is our birthright, and that we deserve it, and that you deserve it wherever you are in your career, that you should prioritize, even if it's in a small way. Always be thinking, what brings me joy? Why am I here? How can I inject more joy into my life? It is fundamental.
I am being so cheeky here. Cheeky is the London word. We know we don't say that over here, but I talk to Brits all day. Um, last question, I promise. But I've asked it of everyone, so I want to make sure I ask it of you. If you could have dinner, and this is not a fair question for you. It hasn't been a fair question for anyone, but I really feel in my heart and soul it's not a fair question for you. If you could have dinner with anyone who's done equity related work, whatever that might have looked like, past or present, who would that be?
So I can make a really long list, but I will say my grandmother. So my grandmother was a powerhouse. So she was part of something called the Aba Women's
Okay.
Revolt. And so, as you know, Nigeria was colonized by the British, and there are tons of struggle. So often when you hear the story, you don't hear how much struggle. And so one of the major struggles was about women, and my grandmother was one of them, because the British tried to raise, thieves. They tried to raise taxes. The market women. So there's a whole community of Igbo women who they went to
Yeah.
the market. They made money, and so the British tried to raise taxes on them. And
They
these
said
women
hell
got
no.
together and they're like, absolutely not. They said, absolutely not. What you're not going to do is this. And so they all got together, they organized, and it's women, like mothers, against guns. And many of them were killed. Eventually, the levy was lifted, but many people were killed, and they didn't. Just imagine being a woman, mind you have a family, you have kids, you have this business. You're an entrepreneur, you're not a soldier, but they were turned into soldiers. And so I would love,
Hmm.
she died when I was quite young, like
Okay.
before, like I think I was 8. So
Yeah.
I didn't get to know her as a woman. And I would love, love to talk to her and understand like what gave you the courage to do what you, because I'm doing what I'm doing, but nobody's trying to shoot me. Like she did what she did and her life was on the line. And I want to talk to her and ask her, how did you get that type of courage? How did you manage to be a warrior, an entrepreneur, a mother, a wife? How did you do all of that? How did you find that type of courage? So that's why I want to talk to my grandmother. My mother's mom.
This is so bad. I was gonna say it's always mom's mom. That we want to have these conversations. That is not true.
Listen.
Okay, just strike that from the record. My gosh, I could talk to you all day. There's so many tangents, but time might also be a man-made construct. But unfortunately, here we are having to abide by it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you on behalf of those of us who have not yet taken a sabbatical, that you are taking one and leading by example, because folks say rest all the time, Black women, and don't actually rest themselves. So just leading by example, I appreciate that 100%. I'm going to make sure I have folks listening to the podcast, but make sure those who identify as Black women will definitely, I'm like, no, but you have to. And then I will ask you, what were your thoughts? Because you are amazing. You are light. For those who want to follow you, just out of curiosity, on your sabbatical, are we documenting this, or are we just truly living life freely?
It's so funny because after having worked in social media for 14 years, like I'm feeling tired of it. Having said that, I still will post on Instagram pictures, and so I have some posts from when I was in Cartagena, because I just found it really impactful. My name is Ebele Okobi, so Ebele Okobi at Instagram. Thank you so much for having me. This was absolute joy.
Thank you for joining me. This has been amazing.